The horse had thrown off 20 men when a mute boy approached. The moment he touched the animal, the millionaire froze upon seeing the mark on his hand. Dawn crept over the Kentucky hills, painting the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold. In the cramped bedroom of the Hargrove farmhouse, 12-year-old Noah Bennett lay awake, listening to the cacophony of morning preparations. 5 Hargrove children plus 2 other foster kids scrambled around him, fighting for bathroom time and clean socks, their voices rising and falling like waves against the shore. Noah remained still, a small island of silence in the chaos. His blue eyes, too old for his young face, tracked the dust motes dancing in the beam of sunlight that sliced through worn curtains. When the room finally emptied, he rose soundlessly, making his bed with military precision before dressing in faded jeans and a too large flannel shirt. In the kitchen, Mrs. Hargrove orchestrated breakfast with the efficiency of a woman who had been feeding a small army for years. Plates clattered, toast popped, children shouted. Noah slipped into his usual spot at the far end of the table, invisible as always. "Oh, Noah." Mrs. Hargrove jumped slightly when she turned and noticed him. Her weathered face registered momentary guilt. "I didn't see you there, honey." She glanced at the empty serving plates, the realization dawning that the others had taken everything. "Let me make you something quick." Noah shook his head slightly, not wanting to be a bother, but his stomach betrayed him with an audible growl. Mrs. Hargrove sighed, her shoulders sagging with the weight of too many responsibilities, and popped another slice of bread into the toaster. "Here you go," she said moments later, sliding a hastily buttered piece of toast toward him. "Sorry it's not much. Payday's not till Friday." Noah accepted the offering with a small nod, careful to keep his scarred right hand partially hidden under the table, a habit formed from years of avoiding stares. The star-shaped burn mark on his palm felt particularly tight this morning, as it often did when rain was coming. An hour later, Noah sat in the back row of his 7th grade classroom, his presence barely registering with Mrs. Peterson, who was busy trying to control the more disruptive students. The lesson on photosynthesis washed over him, words that held no meaning compared to what he observed in the natural world every day. When the recess bell rang, Noah waited for the stampede of students to clear before slipping out a side door. Instead of heading to the playground, he moved with practiced stealth toward the eastern edge of the school property, where a small gap in the fence offered passage to freedom. Once through, Noah quickened his pace, heading toward the gleaming white fences of Calumet Farm. The prestigious horse breeding operation sprawled across hundreds of acres of Kentucky's finest bluegrass country. Noah knew every gap in the boundary, every blind spot in the security system, every place where a small, quiet boy could become invisible. He settled on his favorite spot, a gentle rise beneath an ancient oak that offered a perfect view of the training oval. From his canvas backpack, Noah withdrew a worn sketchbook and a tin of pencils saved from school supplies. His fingers, nimble despite the scarred right hand, selected a soft graphite pencil. Below him, thoroughbreds circled the track, their bodies moving with a grace that made Noah's heart ache with something between longing and recognition. His pencil began to dance across the paper, capturing not just their form but the essence of their movement. The exact moment when all 4 hooves left the ground, the subtle shift of muscle beneath gleaming coats, the expression in eyes that held both wildness and surrender. The sound of voices drifted up from a nearby stable. Noah froze, then slowly crept closer, keeping to the shadows. "Did you hear about that Texas oil fella?" A stable hand in Calumet Farm uniform leaned against a pitchfork. "Bought the old Millerville property." "Thornwood?" "Yeah, heard he's loaded. Drives a car worth more than my house," replied another, wiping sweat from his brow. "That ain't the half of it. He brought some wild Mustang with him, black as midnight with a white star on its muzzle. They say it nearly killed 3 men who tried to break it." Noah's pencil stilled above his paper. Something about the description caught in his mind like a burr. "Captured from federal lands, I heard," the first man continued. "Thornwood paid a fortune for it. Wants to prove he can tame what nobody else could." "Fool's errand," scoffed the other. "Some horses can't be broken. Not really. Noah spent the afternoon cleaning stalls at McIntyre's farm, a small operation neighboring Calumet. Old Mr. McIntyre paid him a few dollars under the table, never asking why a boy his age wasn't in school, never commenting on his silence. The work was hard but satisfying, honest labor that left Noah pleasantly tired and smelling of hay and horses. It was there, while mucking out the broodmare stall, that Noah overheard more about Richard Thornwood and his mysterious Mustang. $10,000, exclaimed McIntyre's daughter, reading from her phone. That's what Thornwood's offering to anyone who can stay on Thunderstrike for 30 seconds. Her father snorted. Man's got more money than sense. You can't buy respect from a horse. He's hosting some kind of rodeo thing this Sunday at his place. Says it's time the Mustang learns who's boss. Noah's grip tightened on the pitchfork handle, his knuckles whitening. Something about the challenge stirred a deep unease in him. That night, for the first time in months, the nightmares returned. Flames and screams and a horse's panicked whinny merging into a symphony of terror that left him gasping awake in the darkness, his throat raw as if he'd been screaming, though no sound had passed his lips. Sunday morning arrived with a gentle rain that cleared by noon, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. The Hargroves piled into their aging van for church, not noticing Noah's absence until they were halfway there. Mr. Hargrove merely shrugged. The silent foster kid was always wandering off, and he always came back eventually. Noah made his way across the rolling landscape, following fence lines and creek beds, until he reached the imposing gates of what locals still called the Millerville property, though a shiny new sign proclaimed it Thornwood Estate. The grounds teemed with pickup trucks and cars. A surprisingly large crowd gathered for the spectacle. Finding a gap in the perimeter fence, Noah slipped onto the property and made his way to a large red barn. He positioned himself behind it, peering around the corner at the makeshift arena where a crowd had gathered on hastily constructed bleachers. Richard Thornwood held court from a raised platform, a glass of amber liquid in one hand. He was younger than Noah had expected, perhaps 40, with the polished good looks of someone who spent more on grooming than most families spent on groceries. His voice carried across the arena, amplified by a wireless microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness something special." Thornwood's Texas drawl dripped with confidence. "Thunderstrike here is reputed to be unrideable. I say that's a challenge, not a fact." Beside him stood a slender black woman in her 50s, her white lab coat incongruous among the casual attire of the spectators. Her face was set in an expression of professional neutrality, but Noah could see tension in her shoulders. "Mr. Thornwood," she said, leaning close to the microphone, "as I've explained repeatedly, this animal is traumatized. He needs time and proper treatment, not—" "Dr. Washington," Thornwood cut her off with a dismissive wave. "You handle the diseases, I'll handle the business. Now who's our first rider?" A burly man in a cowboy hat swaggered into the arena as handlers struggled to bring forth the Mustang. Noah's breath caught in his throat as Thunderstrike emerged into the sunlight. The horse was magnificent, coal black from nose to tail, with powerful shoulders and a proud, high head. His coat gleamed like wet ink, despite the layers of sweat already darkening his flanks. But what struck Noah most were the eyes, wild, intelligent, and filled with such fury and fear that the boy could feel it radiating across the distance between them. As the horse was forced into a chute, Noah saw something else, the network of scars crisscrossing the animal's body. Some were the thin lines of whip marks, others the round evidence of burns. And there, just as described, was a perfect white star-shaped marking on his muzzle, standing out like a beacon against the black coat. The first rider lasted 6 seconds before being thrown spectacularly into the dirt. The crowd gasped, then cheered as the man limped away, pride more injured than his body. Thunderstrike paced the perimeter of the arena, nostrils flared, looking for escape. Rider after rider took their turn. Some employed cruel spurs that left pinpricks of blood on the Mustang's sides. Others used special bits that gave them extra leverage against the animal's sensitive mouth. One by one they hit the dirt, Thunderstrike remaining unconquered. By the 20th rider, the horse was visibly exhausted. White foam flecked his dark coat, and his sides heaved with exertion. Still, his spirit remained unbroken, his eyes burning with defiance even as his body trembled with fatigue. "Bring out the sharpest spurs!" shouted a Texas cowboy, frustrated after his third failed attempt. "This devil needs to learn respect." Something fractured inside Noah. Before conscious thought could intervene, his feet were moving of their own accord. He slipped under the bottom rail of the fence and walked directly into the arena. The crowd, initially confused by the small figure entering the danger zone, fell into stunned silence. "Get that kid out of there," Thornwood shouted, spilling his drink in alarm. Two security guards moved forward, but Dr. Washington blocked their path with surprising authority. "Wait," she commanded. "Look." Time seemed to crystallize. Thunderstrike, who moments before had been prepared to attack any human who approached, stood absolutely still. His flared nostrils quivered, catching the scent of this new, small intruder. Noah stopped several yards from the horse. He made no attempt to touch or dominate the animal. Instead, he simply sat down in the dirt, his back to the Mustang, and began tracing patterns in the earth with his fingers. The crowd, initially panicked, now watched in astonished silence. When Thunderstrike took a hesitant step toward the boy, someone let out a muffled cry. But the horse merely stretched out his neck, nostrils sniffing the air near the boy's head. Noah remained absolutely motionless except for his fingers, which continued drawing circles in the sand. Then it happened. The boy slowly turned his face and raised his right hand, the hand with the star-shaped scar. The Mustang backed away momentarily but then approached again, bringing his star-marked muzzle nearly to touch the boy's scarred hand. In that moment of mutual recognition, even the arrogant Richard Thornwood felt something he didn't understand. Two wounded souls had found each other, and a wordless language was beginning to be spoken. A hush fell over the arena as the boy and horse remained frozen in their silent exchange. The star-shaped scar on Noah's palm hovered inches from the white star marking on Thunderstrike's muzzle, neither touching yet both somehow connected by an invisible thread of recognition. The crowd held its collective breath, witnessing something they couldn't name but instinctively understood was extraordinary. Richard Thornwood broke the spell, clearing his throat loudly. "Well, that's enough excitement for today," he announced, gesturing for his handlers to approach. "Get the boy out and secure the horse." Dr. Washington stepped forward. "Mr. Thornwood, wait. Look at how the Mustang is responding to him." Her voice carried a mixture of professional interest and wonder. "I've never seen anything like this." Thornwood's eyes narrowed as he observed the scene. The businessman in him recognized an opportunity, even as the showman in him bristled at being upstaged by a child. "Fine," he said finally, waving his handlers back. "Give the mute a week. If nothing comes of it, we go back to professionals." The following morning, Noah arrived at the Thornwood estate before the dew had dried on the bluegrass. He'd slipped out of the Hargrove house unnoticed, leaving a hastily scribbled note saying he was doing extra work at McIntyre's farm. The security guard at the gate, briefed about the unusual arrangement, nodded him through with obvious skepticism. Noah made his way to Thunderstrike's enclosure, a high-fenced paddock separate from the elegant stables housing Thornwood's expensive thoroughbreds. The Mustang stood at the far end, ears pinned back, muscles tense beneath his scarred black coat. For 3 hours, Noah simply sat cross-legged in the dirt, about 20 feet from the fence. He didn't call to the horse or make any attempt to approach. Instead, he opened his sketchbook and began to draw, glancing up occasionally to study the Mustang's form. Thunderstrike maintained his distance, watching the boy with wary, intelligent eyes. Dr. Eliza Washington found them like this when she arrived for her morning rounds. She observed silently from a distance before approaching Noah. "You're quite the artist," she said softly, glancing at his detailed sketch of Thunderstrike. "You've captured his spirit." Noah didn't look up, but his pencil paused momentarily in acknowledgement of her presence. "I'm Dr. Washington. I take care of the horses here." She knelt to his level, careful to keep her movements slow and non-threatening. "That's a special scar you have. May I ask how you got it?" Noah's fingers instinctively curled inward, hiding the star-shaped mark. He returned to his drawing without response. "I understand," Eliza said, rising. "Sometimes our scars tell stories we're not ready to share." She glanced at Thunderstrike, who had moved slightly closer to observe their interaction. "He has his own stories too, written all over his body. Maybe that's what he recognizes in you." On the third day, Noah brought an apple. He placed it carefully in the center of the paddock and retreated to his usual spot. Thunderstrike circled the fruit suspiciously, nostrils flaring to catch its scent. Hours passed before the Mustang finally approached, snatched the apple quickly, and retreated to the far corner to eat it. From the main house, Thornwood observed through binoculars, his impatience evident. "This is ridiculous," he complained to Eliza, who stood beside him on the veranda. "I pay 5 staff members to handle my horses, and now I have some kid playing statue on my ranch. You've already spent thousands on trainers who've only made this animal more traumatized," Eliza replied calmly. "The boy is making more progress in days than your specialists did in weeks." "Progress?" Thornwood scoffed. "He hasn't even touched the horse." "Exactly," Eliza said. "He's building trust, not demanding submission. It's a completely different approach." Rain fell steadily on the 7th day, turning the paddock to mud. Thornwood expected the boy wouldn't show, but at dawn, there was Noah, huddled in a too-large raincoat, sitting in his usual spot. Thunderstrike had moved closer, now keeping only about 10 feet between them rather than the entire length of the enclosure. Word began to spread through Millerville about the mute foster boy and the wild Mustang. The story passed from the feed store to the diner, from church pews to school hallways. By the second Sunday, a small group of locals had gathered discreetly at the paddock fence, carrying folding chairs and thermoses of coffee. "Never seen anything like it," whispered Betty McIntyre to her neighbor. "Just sits there for hours, drawing. And that horse, meanest creature I ever saw when they brought him in. He's different now." Among the onlookers was Calvin White Eagle, one of the few Blackfoot individuals still living in the area. The elderly man observed silently, his weathered face impassive. When asked what he thought, he simply nodded toward the pair. "The boy understands something we've forgotten," he said finally. "Horses are spirits who choose who to carry. They cannot be broken, only invited." By the end of the second week, the Hargrove family had discovered Noah's whereabouts through local gossip. Mrs. Hargrove arrived at the Thornwood estate, flustered and apologetic. "I'm so sorry if he's been a bother," she said to Thornwood. "Noah's a good boy, just different since the accident. We'll make sure he doesn't come back." Thornwood surprisingly shook his head. "Actually, Mrs. Hargrove, I've been meaning to contact you. Your boy has a way with this particular horse. I'd like to offer a small stipend for him to continue working here, with your permission, of course." The offer wasn't charity. Thornwood had begun to calculate the potential value of Thunderstrike if properly trained. A wild Mustang with unusual markings and a compelling backstory could be worth far more than he'd paid, especially if he could eventually be shown or bred. The boy was simply a means to an end. The Hargroves, struggling to make ends meet with 8 children under their roof, couldn't afford to decline the unexpected income, and so the unusual arrangement continued, with Noah spending every afternoon after school at the Thornwood estate. As October brought cooler temperatures and golden light to Kentucky, the Sunday gatherings grew. Locals brought picnic baskets and children, settling in to watch what they had begun to call the silent dance, the gradual, delicate negotiation of space between boy and horse. "He's never tried to touch it?" asked a newcomer one Sunday. "That's the whole point," explained an elderly woman who had been watching for weeks. "He's letting the horse decide when it's ready." In the third week came the breakthrough that everyone had been waiting for. Noah was sitting in his usual spot sketching when Thunderstrike approached from behind. The crowd held its breath as the Mustang extended his muzzle and gently touched Noah's shoulder. The boy remained absolutely still, only slowly turning his head to meet the horse's gaze. Those who witnessed it later described it as a sacred moment, as if some unspoken agreement had been reached between two souls. A reporter from the Lexington Herald happened to be present that day. His article, titled "The Silent Whisperer," featured a photograph of Noah sitting near the majestic Mustang. The story touched hearts throughout the region and caused Thornwood's phone to ring with inquiries about the horse and the mysterious boy with the healing touch. The attention irritated Thornwood, who had expected to be the central figure in any narrative about Thunderstrike. "Set a deadline," he ordered Eliza one morning. "2 weeks for the boy to ride the horse, or we end this charade." Eliza, who had become fiercely protective of the connection between Noah and Thunderstrike, stood her ground. "Riding isn't the goal here. We're witnessing healing, not domination." "Healing doesn't pay bills," Thornwood retorted. "That horse cost me a small fortune, and I intend to see a return on my investment." The most extraordinary moment occurred during a violent autumn storm that swept through Kentucky one night. Concerned about the animals, Eliza drove to the farm well past midnight. To her shock, she discovered Noah had somehow escaped from the Hargrove home and made his way to the estate in the downpour. Lightning illuminated the landscape in harsh flashes as Eliza searched frantically for the boy. She found him not in the stables where she expected, but beneath an old oak tree at the edge of Thunderstrike's paddock. The sight stopped her in her tracks. Noah was curled against the Mustang's flank, fast asleep. Thunderstrike stood perfectly still, his body positioned to shield the boy from the driving rain. The horse that supposedly couldn't tolerate human touch was now protecting a child from the elements. "He protected the boy," Eliza recounted tearfully the next day to Martha Collins, the local school principal who had come to check on Noah after hearing he'd been missing during the storm. Thunderstrike could have run to the shelter of the stable, but he stayed there, covering Noah with his body throughout the night. Martha listened, fascinated. As an educator constantly seeking innovative approaches for children with learning difficulties, she recognized something profound in what Eliza described. "I'd like to bring some of our special needs students to observe them," she suggested. "Would that be possible?" Thornwood, initially resistant to the idea of turning his property into an educational field trip, relented when Martha mentioned the positive press it would generate. A week later, a small group of children with various learning challenges arrived at the estate. The impact was immediate and striking. Children who rarely maintained attention for more than minutes became transfixed by the silent communication between Noah and Thunderstrike. A nonverbal autistic boy who typically avoided eye contact sat perfectly still, watching the pair with unwavering focus. "What we're witnessing is a form of communication that transcends words," explained Dr. James Harrison, a child psychologist who accompanied the visit. "Noah is teaching not just the horse, but all of us, that true connection requires complete presence and absolute respect." As October gave way to November, Thunderstrike began to follow Noah around the open pasture, walking side by side without any physical restraint. The Mustang that once attacked any human who approached now lowered his head to allow the boy to stroke his neck. It was then that Richard Thornwood made his announcement during a charity gala dinner in Lexington, his voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced authority. "I've entered Thunderstrike in the Lexington Grand Stakes next spring," he declared to the shock of those who understood horse racing. "By then, he'll be trained and ready to show his worth as a breeding stallion." When Eliza protested later that evening that the animal wasn't ready for competition and might never be, Thornwood was merciless. "If the boy can't deliver concrete results by the end of the month, I'm selling Thunderstrike to a rodeo in Texas. They know how to handle problem horses there." Martha Collins, who was observing the interaction between Noah and Thunderstrike during a visit of field organized for children with learning difficulties, whispered to Eliza, "What's happening between them isn't just about horses. We're witnessing a form of communication that could transform how we understand human connection." Martha Collins watched in wonder as the nonverbal autistic boy, who rarely made eye contact with anyone, remained completely absorbed in the silent exchange between Noah and Thunderstrike. Something about their wordless communication resonated deeply with the child, whose fingers fluttered with excitement as the Mustang gently lowered his head toward Noah's outstretched hand. "It's remarkable," Martha whispered to Eliza as they observed from a respectful distance. "Jamie hasn't stayed focused on anything for this long since I've known him." Eliza nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Horses communicate primarily through body language and energy, exactly how Noah is communicating. For children who find our verbal world overwhelming, this makes perfect sense. The school visit had stretched well beyond its scheduled hour, but none of the children wanted to leave. Even the usually hyperactive students sat quietly on the grass, watching the dance of trust unfolding before them. Noah, aware of his audience but not performing for them, moved with deliberate slowness around Thunderstrike, his gestures measured and consistent. "Notice how he always approaches from the same angle," Eliza explained to the group of teachers. "He's creating predictability which builds security. For traumatized beings, animal or human, knowing what comes next is everything." After the school group reluctantly departed, Noah remained with Thunderstrike in the late afternoon sunlight. For the first time, the Mustang followed him across the paddock, maintaining a constant distance of 2 paces, like a respectful shadow. When Noah stopped, Thunderstrike stopped. When he moved, the horse moved. No rope connected them, no commands were given, just the invisible thread of trust slowly strengthening between them. The following week, Martha approached Eliza with a proposal. "I'd like to develop a pilot program bringing some of our autistic students to work with you and Noah," she said, her eyes bright with possibility. "What we witnessed last week wasn't just about horse training. It was a breakthrough in communication." Eliza hesitated. "Martha, I'd love that. But Thornwood views this place as a business, not a therapy center. He's already impatient with Noah's progress." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Richard Thornwood's Mercedes roared up the driveway, scattering gravel. He'd been in Louisville for 3 days at a business conference, and his return always shifted the atmosphere of the farm from peaceful to tense. That evening, at an elegant charity gala in downtown Lexington, Thornwood stood to make what the event program listed as a special announcement. The ballroom of the historic hotel fell silent as he tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. "Ladies and gentlemen, as many of you know, I recently acquired a rather special Mustang." He paused for effect, surveying the crowd of Kentucky's elite horse breeders, trainers, and racing enthusiasts. "I'm pleased to announce that Thunderstrike will make his debut at the Lexington Grand Stakes this spring." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone at a back table actually laughed, assuming it was a joke. "That wild Mustang? In a thoroughbred race?" whispered an elderly woman to her companion. "Impossible." "Has he lost his mind?" muttered a respected trainer to his tablemates. "That's like entering a street fighter in a ballet competition." Eliza, who had been invited as Thornwood's staff veterinarian, felt her stomach twist. She had suspected Thornwood had commercial plans for Thunderstrike, but nothing this grandiose or inappropriate. A wild Mustang, still in the earliest stages of human contact, thrust into the high-pressure environment of elite racing. It was a recipe for disaster. She confronted Thornwood as he basked in the attention at the bar after his announcement. "Mr. Thornwood, you can't be serious about the Grand Stakes," she said, keeping her voice low but firm. "Thunderstrike isn't a racehorse. He's just beginning to trust humans again." Thornwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Washington, I appreciate your concern, but I didn't invest in that animal for sentimental reasons. He has speed, stamina, and now a compelling story that will make him valuable as a breeding stallion. He's nowhere near ready for that kind of environment. The crowds, the starting gates, it would traumatize him all over again." Thornwood's expression hardened. "I've been patient with your unorthodox approach and that mute kid's petting zoo routine, but my patience has limits." He swirled the bourbon in his glass. "If the boy can't demonstrate concrete results by the end of the month, and by that I mean Thunderstrike accepting a rider and basic commands, I'm selling him to a rodeo outfit in Texas." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "A rodeo? That would destroy him." "Then I suggest you and the boys step up your game." Thornwood drained his glass and set it firmly on the bar. "In Texas, they know how to handle problem horses." The news devastated the small community that had formed around Noah and Thunderstrike. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small towns, and by Sunday morning, the usual gathering at the paddock fence had a somber tone. "Can't they see what they'd be destroying?" asked Betty McIntyre, her weathered hands clutching a thermos of coffee. That horse trusts the boy. Nobody else. Calvin White Eagle, who rarely spoke at these gatherings, shook his head slowly. Men like Thornwood see only what can be possessed, not what can be honored. Noah, though unable to express himself in words, demonstrated his determination by appearing the next morning before dawn, carrying only his sketchbook and an apple. The overnight dew had transformed the paddock into a silver-gilded dreamscape, wisps of fog hovering just above the grass. Thunderstrike stood alert near the fence, his ears pricked forward at Noah's approach. This morning, Noah did something no one had witnessed before. He drew a perfect circle in the earth with a stick, placed himself in the center, and extended his arms outward, palms up. Thunderstrike, as if understanding a secret code, walked deliberately to the circle's edge. For a long moment, horse and boy regarded each other across this symbolic boundary. Then, with deliberate slowness, the Mustang stepped into the circle and lowered his majestic head, inviting Noah's touch. Eliza, who had arrived early to check on a pregnant mare, witnessed this moment from a distance. She couldn't stop the tears that welled in her eyes. The Mustang hadn't been broken. He had chosen to trust. Later that afternoon, Brad Collins, a renowned trainer from Louisville hired by Thornwood, observed the interaction critically from the fence. "Impressive," he admitted, tipping back his cowboy hat. "The kid's got a gift, no question. But this isn't preparation for racing. We need discipline, proper equipment, intensive conditioning." Eliza bristled. "Thunderstrike isn't a machine you can program. His progress depends on building trust at his pace, not ours." "Look, Dr. Washington, I understand your attachment," Collins said, not unkindly. "But Mr. Thornwood is paying me to get results. By next week, we need to introduce a light saddle, then a rider. The clock's ticking." The following day, while Noah was in school, Collins and 2 assistants entered Thunderstrike's paddock with a training saddle. The change in the Mustang was instantaneous and heartbreaking. The calm, increasingly confident animal transformed back into a creature of pure terror and rage. He reared, kicked, and finally broke through the paddock fence, sustaining cuts along his flank from the splintered wood. When Noah arrived that afternoon, he found Thunderstrike trembling in the far corner of the pasture, blood staining his black coat. The betrayal in the animal's eyes was unmistakable. It took Noah 3 hours of sitting motionless in the rain before the Mustang would even look in his direction again. Eliza confronted Thornwood in his luxurious home office that evening, her professional demeanor barely containing her anger. "You've undone months of progress with outdated methods," she said, placing photographs of Thunderstrike's injuries on his desk. "That horse associates saddles with pain and fear. Forcing one on him triggered all his previous trauma." Thornwood barely glanced at the photos. "Dr. Washington, I respect your expertise with illnesses, but this is about training. Traditional methods have worked for centuries." "Not for horses like Thunderstrike," Eliza insisted. "He's not just wild. He's been systematically abused. Every scar on his body represents a human betrayal." "Then perhaps he's too damaged to be useful," Thornwood replied coldly. "I'm not running a rehabilitation center for horses with emotional problems." That night, Noah sat alone with Thunderstrike under a sky ablaze with stars. The Mustang had finally allowed him close again, though the animal's posture still held wariness that hadn't been there before. Noah's fingers gently traced the fresh cuts on the horse's flank, and silent tears tracked down his cheeks as he pressed his forehead against Thunderstrike's neck. Eliza, checking on them one last time before heading home, watched from a distance as boy and horse comforted each other under the Kentucky stars. "They need each other," she whispered to herself. "Both so wounded, both so strong." The next morning, Thornwood announced his new restrictions. Noah would only be allowed to visit Thunderstrike on weekends, and only under supervision of the professional trainers. "We're entering the serious phase of training now," he declared. "The circus is over." Thunderstrike's reaction to Noah's absence was immediate and disturbing. The Mustang refused food and water for 2 entire days, standing at the fence facing the direction from which Noah always appeared. When the trainers attempted to approach with halters and leads, he grew so agitated that even Collins advised backing off. Never seen anything like it, the trainer admitted to Eliza as they watched Thunderstrike pacing restlessly. It's like he's mourning. By the third day, Eliza was concerned enough about dehydration to call Thornwood directly at his Louisville office. The horse hasn't eaten or drunk anything since Noah's last visit, she reported. He's going to collapse if this continues. Then sedate him and get fluids into him, Thornwood snapped. That would destroy what little trust remains, Eliza argued. Let the boy visit, just for an hour. After much negotiation, Thornwood reluctantly agreed. When Noah arrived that afternoon, Thunderstrike's transformation was immediate and telling. The Mustang whickered softly, the first vocalization many had heard from him, and trotted directly to the fence where Noah stood. As Noah slipped into the paddock, Thunderstrike circled him once, twice, as if assuring himself the boy was really there, then pressed his muzzle gently against Noah's chest. The boy wrapped his arms around the Mustang's neck, and for a long moment, they simply stood together, two beings communicating in a language deeper than words. You see what you're destroying? Eliza said quietly to Collins, who watched the reunion with evident discomfort. This isn't stubbornness or disobedience. It's a bond. When Thornwood announced that he was reducing Noah's access to only weekends under supervision, Thunderstrike reacted violently to the separation, refusing food and water for 2 days straight, making it clear to everyone except the obstinate Millionaire that the bond between the boy and the horse had become vital to both. The weekends became Noah's lifeline. The 5 school days stretched endlessly before him, each minute ticking by with excruciating slowness while he sat in classrooms, his mind constantly drifting to Thunderstrike. During these enforced separations, Noah began a new ritual that surprised even Eliza. He started learning sign language. It began on a Tuesday afternoon when Eliza found Noah sitting at the Hargroves' kitchen table, poring over a library book titled American Sign Language, The Basics. I thought you might like to learn another way to express yourself, Eliza said, sitting across from him and demonstrating the sign for friend. Her fingers formed the motion with practiced ease, index fingers hooked together, then reversed. My cousin is deaf. I learned when I was about your age. Noah watched intently, then replicated the gesture perfectly. His blue eyes held a determination that Eliza had come to recognize, the same focus he brought to his work with Thunderstrike. Good, she encouraged. Now, how about horse? She demonstrated, her hand mimicking a horse's ears atop her head. For the next hour, they worked through basic signs. Noah absorbed each one with remarkable speed, his hands speaking what his voice could not. By the end of the session, he could sign a simple sentence. My friend is a horse. You're a natural, Eliza told him. Next time, we'll learn more about feelings. As Noah expanded his silent vocabulary, trouble was brewing at the Thornwood estate. Miguel Hernandez, one of the Mexican stable hands who had worked there since Thornwood purchased the property, was cleaning stalls near the main office when he overheard his employer on the phone. The price is fair for a problem Mustang, Thornwood was saying, his voice carrying through the partially open window. Those Texas rodeo boys know how to break these beasts. Once they're done with him, he'll either submit or… There was a pause. Well, that's not my concern, is it? Miguel froze, a pitchfork full of soiled straw suspended mid-air. He had grown fond of Thunderstrike and had witnessed the transformation the animal had undergone through Noah's gentle approach. The thought of the Mustang being sent to rodeo cowboys known for their brutal breaking methods made his stomach turn. That evening, after his shift ended, Miguel drove his battered pickup to Dr. Washington's small veterinary practice on the outskirts of town. The clinic had closed for the day, but light still spilled from the back office window. It's cruelty, doctor, Miguel said, sitting across from Eliza's cluttered desk, twisting his worn baseball cap in his hands. That horse is finally learning to trust, and they're going to send him to be tortured in rodeos until he completely breaks. Eliza's face grew grave as Miguel recounted the conversation he'd overheard. Are you absolutely certain about this, Miguel? Thornwood knows there would be public backlash if word got out. I heard it with my own ears, Miguel confirmed, He doesn't care what happens to Thunderstrike. It's all business to him. After Miguel left, Eliza sat for a long time staring at her phone. Finally, she dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "David, it's Eliza Washington," she said when a male voice answered. "I know it's been a while, but I need a favor that only someone at the Bureau of Land Management could help with." The following Sunday at the Millerville Methodist Church, Reverend Thomas Wilson delivered a sermon that had the congregation shifting uncomfortably in their pews. His text was David and Goliath, but his message spoke directly to current events. David didn't defeat Goliath with strength. The Reverend's voice resonated through the small white church. He prevailed with wisdom that the powerful despised. How often do we ignore the wisdom of the smallest among us because it doesn't match our expectations of how victory should look? In the third row, Martha Collins nodded vigorously, while beside her, several teachers from the local school exchanged meaningful glances. Everyone knew exactly who the modern-day David was in this metaphor. After the service, a small group gathered at Millie's diner for coffee and pie. What began as casual conversation soon evolved into an impromptu community meeting. "There has to be something we can do," Betty McIntyre insisted, tapping her spoon against her coffee cup for emphasis. "That boy and that horse belong together. Thornwood has the law on his side," Calvin White Eagle noted quietly. "The horse is his property." "Maybe not," Martha interjected, lowering her voice. "Eliza mentioned something about investigating how Thunderstrike was acquired in the first place." Across town, in the polished opulence of the Lexington Country Club, Richard Thornwood was having a very different kind of Sunday meeting. Surrounded by business associates over an elaborate brunch, he brandished the latest edition of the Lexington Herald. "Outrageous," he fumed, slapping the newspaper where an editorial questioned his methods and motives regarding Thunderstrike. "They're painting me as some kind of villain when I've invested thousands in that animal's care." "It's just a small-town paper, Richard," soothed a fellow developer. "Hardly worth your attention." "It's the principle," Thornwood insisted. "No one tells me how to manage my property. I'll have my lawyers contact them tomorrow about defamation." Back at the estate, Thunderstrike's training had intensified under Brad Collins's direction. The Mustang's progress with Noah was dismissed as irrelevant to the real work of preparing him for racing. Each attempt to introduce equipment resulted in violent rejection. A cavalryman was thrown against the fence when he tried to mount Thunderstrike using a traditional saddle. The Mustang's fear response was so extreme that even Collins began to question Thornwood's timeline. "Some horses can't overcome certain traumas," he admitted to Eliza after a particularly harrowing session. "Something about saddles triggers a panic response in him that's beyond normal resistance." Thornwood's response to these setbacks was predictable. He banned Noah completely from the property, claiming the boy's coddling was undermining the professional training methods. He accelerated preparations to transfer Thunderstrike to Texas, ordering specialized transportation to be ready within 2 weeks. The news spread quickly through Millerville's tight-knit community. Noah, when told he could no longer visit Thunderstrike, showed more emotion than anyone had seen from him in years. His hands flew in agitated signs that only Eliza could interpret, tears streaming down his face as he tried to express his desperation. "He's saying Thunderstrike will think he's been abandoned," Eliza translated for the Hargroves. "He's saying the horse won't understand." Meanwhile, Eliza's inquiry to her former college classmate at the Bureau of Land Management was bearing fruit. David Morris, now a senior agent responsible for wild horse protection, had begun pulling records on Thunderstrike's acquisition. "Something doesn't add up," he told Eliza during a late-night phone call. "The documentation shows he was purchased through legal channels, but the identification markings don't match any Mustang properly released from federal protection." "What does that mean?" Eliza asked, heart quickening. "It means someone falsified paperwork. We've been investigating a ring of Mustang traffickers who capture horses from protected lands and launder them through fake auctions. That star marking you described is consistent with a specific herd that should never have been touched. The pieces were falling into place, but time was running out." Thornwood had organized an elaborate reception at his estate for potential investors and sports journalists, promising a demonstration of Thunderstrike's progress. The event was clearly designed to increase the horse's profile and value before selling him off to the rodeo. The night of the reception arrived with all the trappings of Kentucky high society. Luxury cars lined the driveway of the Thornwood estate. Women in cocktail dresses and men in blazers mingled on the manicured lawn, champagne flutes in hand, while a string quartet played softly in the background. Noah, who hadn't seen Thunderstrike for 2 weeks, couldn't bear the separation any longer. After the Hargroves had gone to bed, he slipped out his bedroom window and began the long walk to the Thornwood estate, determined to at least say goodbye to the horse that had somehow healed something broken inside him. What Noah didn't know was that he wasn't the only one sneaking onto the property that night. Jack Peterson, a young reporter for the Lexington Herald who had been investigating illegal Mustang trafficking for months, was also making his way through the darkness. In his camera bag were documents and photographs suggesting Thornwood's complicity in a multi-state horse laundering operation. As guests sipped champagne and Thornwood regaled them with exaggerated stories of Thunderstrike's progress, chaos erupted in the stables. The Mustang, agitated by the unfamiliar preparations for his debut and the harsh methods the trainers had employed to ready him, had broken free during a final grooming session. In the process, he had kicked a stable hand who tried to restrain him, causing a serious injury. Staff members scrambled in all directions, trying to recapture the valuable animal before Thornwood discovered the fiasco. Thunderstrike, frightened and confused, had fled to the farthest corner of the property, near the old oak tree where he and Noah had once sheltered during the storm. It was there that Noah found him, cornered and terrified. The Mustang was bleeding from a cut on his flank, the result of crashing through a wooden fence. His eyes were wild with fear and confusion, his breathing rapid and shallow. Hidden behind a hay bale, Jack Peterson watched and photographed what happened next. Noah simply sat on the ground, drew his circle in the earth, and waited. Thunderstrike, recognizing the ritual, calmed almost immediately. The Mustang approached cautiously and touched the boy's outstretched hand with his muzzle, the hand marked with the star-shaped scar. The moment coincided perfectly with the arrival of federal agents from the Bureau of Land Management, accompanied by Eliza Washington and Robert Gray Wolfe, a Blackfoot representative who had helped identify Thunderstrike's origin. They walked directly into Thornwood's reception, badges displayed. "This animal was illegally captured from protected lands," declared federal agent Daniel Morrison, interrupting Thornwood's elegant reception. "He belongs to a specific herd that has been under federal protection since 2010. The proof of the horse's origin was the star-shaped mark on his muzzle, a genetic trait documented in that specific protected herd." Jack Peterson's photographs showing Noah and Thunderstrike together, the same star-shaped mark on the boy's hand and the horse's muzzle, circulated quickly among the guests through smartphones. "The fire that killed my parents," Eliza explained, interpreting the sign language Noah had frantically begun using, "started when panicked wild horses knocked over lanterns in our campsite. One of them came back and guided firefighters to where I was trapped. It had a white star on its muzzle." The revelation silenced everyone. Thunderstrike wasn't just any Mustang. He was related to the horse that had saved Noah 6 years earlier. The star-shaped scar on the boy's hand wasn't just a coincidence, but a symbol of a connection that transcended common understanding. "This is absurd," Thornwood blustered, face reddening. "I have papers proving legal purchase. You can't just confiscate private property on some wild theory about matching birthmarks." But as smartphones around the reception lit up with Jack Peterson's photographs and preliminary reports of the federal investigation, the tide of opinion in the room visibly turned. Thornwood's carefully constructed image was crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. Confronted with evidence of illegal acquisition and the moving story unfolding before dozens of influential witnesses, Thornwood faced not just public embarrassment but possible criminal charges. His empire, carefully built on the exploitation of animals and people alike, was beginning to crumble under the weight of its own corruption. The hush that fell over the reception area was deafening. Thunderstrike's heritage and Noah's connection to him stunned the gathered elite into silence. Amidst the sea of designer clothing and champagne flutes, something authentic and mysterious had broken through. A connection that couldn't be purchased or manufactured. Later that night, after the federal agents had established temporary custody arrangements for Thunderstrike, Noah sat huddled in the Hargroves' living room, wrapped in a blanket despite the warmth of the house. His hands moved frantically, signing words faster than Eliza could interpret them. "Slow down, Noah," she urged gently. "I can't follow when you sign that quickly." The boy took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he formed more deliberate signs. Eliza translated for the Hargroves, who watched with concern etched on their tired faces. "He says he remembers more now. About the fire, about the horse with the star." Noah's fingers sketched images in the air, flames, screams, the crushing weight of a fallen beam. Then his right hand, the one bearing the star-shaped scar, traced the outline of a horse emerging from smoke. Mrs. Hargrove leaned forward, her work-worn hands clasped tightly. "We never knew the details. The social workers just told us there was a fire and that Noah hadn't spoken since." That night, Noah woke screaming, a hoarse, broken sound that brought Mr. Hargrove running. It was the first vocal sound anyone had heard from him in 6 years. What followed were days of nightmares and fragmented memories pouring out through Noah's increasingly fluid sign language. On the kitchen table, sketches accumulated, detailed drawings of the campsite where his family had stayed, the terrifying progression of the fire, and most significantly, a Mustang with a star-shaped mark returning to guide rescuers through the smoke. Robert Gray Wolfe studied these drawings carefully when he visited the Hargroves 3 days later, accompanied by Eliza and a BLM geneticist named Dr. Karen Mitchell. "The mark is distinctive to this particular herd," Gray Wolfe explained, tracing the star pattern on one of Noah's drawings. "They've roamed those protected territories for generations. Our people called them spirit horses because of the star mark." Dr. Mitchell nodded, pulling out a tablet to show DNA charts. "We've completed preliminary tests on Thunderstrike. He shares genetic markers with the herd Robert describes. The star marking follows a specific inheritance pattern. It's basically a family trait." Noah's hands moved in a question that Eliza translated. "Could Thunderstrike be related to the horse that saved me?" "It's not just possible, it's likely," Dr. Mitchell confirmed. "Given the limited size of that herd and the distinctive marking, I'd say they're probably siblings or closely related." While these revelations unfolded, Thunderstrike remained under BLM custody at a federal equine rehabilitation facility outside Lexington. The Mustang had grown increasingly agitated during his separation from Noah, refusing food and charging at any handler who approached. His behavior confirmed what many had observed. The unique bond between boy and horse was essential to both. After much negotiation and paperwork, Noah was granted special permission to visit Thunderstrike at the facility. The reunion brought tears to the eyes of hardened federal agents. The moment Noah appeared, Thunderstrike's entire demeanor transformed. The aggressive, dangerous animal became calm, his ears forward, a soft nickering sound escaping his throat as the boy approached the fence. "I've never seen anything like it," whispered Dr. Mitchell to Eliza as they observed from a distance. "It's as if they recognize something in each other that goes beyond normal human-animal bonding." Richard Thornwood, meanwhile, had been released on bail pending multiple charges related to illegal wildlife trafficking. His fall from grace was spectacular and public, with former business associates distancing themselves and invitations to elite events mysteriously disappearing. The question of what would happen to his extensive property remained unanswered, creating uncertainty about Thunderstrike's future once the investigation concluded. This uncertainty prompted Calvin White Eagle to speak up during a community meeting held in the Millerville Methodist Church basement one rainy Tuesday evening. The elderly Blackfoot man rarely addressed groups, making his words carry special weight when he finally rose from his folding chair. "In our tradition," he explained, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the crowded room, "when an animal chooses a human, they become responsible for each other. This horse and this boy have a sacred bond. Separating them would be a violence worse than what they've already suffered." The proposal that emerged from that meeting was audacious: to create a sanctuary for rescued Mustangs on the lands that might be confiscated from Thornwood. Eliza Washington volunteered to lead the project, combining her veterinary expertise with a vision for a healing space for both traumatized animals and humans. I can't think of anything more poetic than transforming a place of oppression into a refuge for healing, she declared, to enthusiastic applause. As legal negotiations progressed slowly through the system, Thunderstrike remained in limbo at the federal facility. Noah was permitted daily visits, during which the transformation of the animal continued to astonish observers. The Mustang who had attacked handlers would follow the boy like a shadow, responding to subtle hand signals and body language that the two had developed into their own private communication system. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child trauma specialist recommended by Martha Collins, began working with Noah during this period. Rather than traditional office sessions, she conducted their therapy at the facility, incorporating Thunderstrike into the healing process. Noah's mind created a fortress of silence to protect itself after the trauma, she explained to the Hargroves during a consultation. Thunderstrike is helping him dismantle that fortress brick by brick in a way that feels safe. The first major breakthrough came when Noah, signing to Dr. Mitchell while sitting beside the Mustang's paddock, described the moment of the fire in vivid detail. "I was sleeping," Eliza translated his signs, then shouting, "Mom and Dad trying to get me out. The roof fell, I couldn't move, smoke everywhere. Then the horse came, the Star Horse. It showed the firefighters where I was. One of the burning logs fell on my hand when they pulled me out." Noah held up his scarred hand, the star pattern clearly visible in the afternoon light. Thunderstrike gently pressed his muzzle against it, the white star on his face aligning almost perfectly with the boy's scar. The Hargroves, witnessing this session, made a decision that surprised everyone, including themselves. That evening, Mr. Hargrove contacted a family lawyer about formally adopting Noah. "We've been foster parents for 15 years, he explained awkwardly to Eliza when she expressed surprise. "Always thought our place was providing temporary homes, but seeing Noah with that horse, well, some things are meant to be permanent." While Noah made progress in his therapy, Thunderstrike showed signs of distress whenever the boy was absent. The Mustang would stand at the fence line, facing the direction from which Noah always appeared, refusing food until the boy returned. "It's concerning," Dr. Mitchell admitted to Eliza. "The bond is healing for Noah, but the horse has become dependent in a way that could be problematic if they're separated." The decisive hearing that would determine Thunderstrike's future was scheduled for a frigid January morning. The federal courthouse in Lexington was packed. Millerville residents in their Sunday best, indigenous representatives in traditional clothing, animal rights activists with discreet buttons and pins, and most surprisingly, a group of special needs children from the local school, all wearing t-shirts featuring a silhouette of a horse with a star. When Judge Walter Simmons requested a demonstration of the bond between Noah and Thunderstrike to inform his decision, the entire court relocated to a nearby field. Under the winter sky, Noah simply extended his star-marked hand. Thunderstrike, without any halter or restraint, approached calmly from across the field. What happened next remained etched in the memory of everyone present. Noah, the boy who hadn't spoken a word for 6 years, smoothly mounted the Mustang's bare back without saddle, bridle, or any equipment. Thunderstrike, the untamable, the feared, galloped freely across the field with Noah in perfect balance on his back, two souls dancing in a harmony that defied explanation. They circled the field once, twice, executing turns and changes of pace that seemed choreographed, despite having no visible signals. When they finally returned to the awaiting crowd, Noah slipped from the horse's back with fluid grace, standing beside him as equals. Not a single eye remained dry. Even Judge Simmons removed his glasses to wipe away tears before clearing his throat to speak. "In 30 years on the bench," he declared in his formal decision later that afternoon, "I have never witnessed a clearer example that our relationship with animals can and should transcend possession and domination." The ruling established the creation of the Silent Whispers Sanctuary on Thornwood's former lands, with Thunderstrike as its first permanent resident. Richard Thornwood, facing multiple charges and the prospect of years in court, agreed to a settlement that included substantial restitution and the donation of the property for the project. As winter yielded to spring, the hills of Kentucky exploded with green life. The white fences of the new sanctuary gleamed in the sunlight as a simple ceremony marked its official opening. Eliza Washington, now executive director, cut the ribbon alongside Noah and the Hargroves, who had finalized his adoption the previous week. This place, Eliza announced to the gathered community, is born from the understanding that healing happens through connection, not control. Here, traumatized horses and wounded people will find time and space to rediscover their inner strength. Noah, standing tall beside Thunderstrike, his hand resting on the Mustang's neck, smiled, a full, unguarded expression that many present had never seen on his face before. In the months since that fateful night at Thornwood's reception, he had begun speaking simple words, each one celebrated as a victory by those who loved him. The pioneer program that was born from that unlikely friendship between a mute boy and a wild horse quickly gained national recognition. Children with trauma, veterans with PTSD, at-risk youth, all found at Silent Whispers a space where time slowed down and the language of the heart prevailed over words. In the peaceful stillness of the new sanctuary's barn, Thunderstrike stood watchful over his domain. The scars on his body would always remain, but the wildness in his eyes had transformed into something else, a wisdom, a purpose. When other rescued Mustangs arrived, it was often he who approached them first, as if understanding their confusion and fear in a way humans never could. "In 30 years on the bench," declared the Judge Simmons in his decision, "I have never witnessed a clearer example that our relationship with animals can and should transcend possession and domination." The sentence in Judge Simmons's ruling echoed across Kentucky horse country throughout the following weeks. For the people of Millerville, it wasn't just a legal victory, but a vindication of values they held dear. That some connections transcend ownership, that healing requires freedom, that the quietest voices sometimes carry the most truth. Eliza Washington stood in what had once been Richard Thornwood's opulent office, now stripped of its mahogany furniture and pretentious oil paintings. Morning light streamed through windows that overlooked rolling pastures where Thunderstrike grazed peacefully. The contrast between what this place had been and what it could become filled her with both excitement and trepidation. "I'm resigning from the clinic," she announced to her colleagues gathered in the makeshift meeting space. The veterinary practice where she'd built her reputation over 15 years had been understanding about her divided attention during the trial, but this was different. "I believe my place is here, building something that matters." Dr. James Harrison, her longtime mentor, nodded slowly. "We'll miss your expertise, Eliza, but I can't say I'm surprised. This sanctuary is a perfect fit for your philosophy of animal care." Later that afternoon, a small group of volunteers gathered at the main entrance of the former Thornwood estate. Calvin White Eagle stood silently as two young men carefully removed the ornate gold-plated sign that had announced the property's previous owner. In its place, they mounted a hand-carved wooden plaque reading "Silent Whispers Sanctuary," with a simple silhouette of a horse's head bearing a star marking. "Good riddance," muttered Betty McIntyre, watching the Thornwood sign being loaded into a pickup truck. "Never did sit right, all that gold and showing off." Noah walked the perimeter of the property with Thunderstrike following at his shoulder, the Mustang's ears constantly swiveling to track the boy's movements. They moved as a unit, stopping occasionally to inspect fences or outbuildings. Noah carried a small notebook, jotting observations and sketching quick diagrams of areas needing repair. "He's doing a complete inventory," Eliza explained to Martha Collins, who had arrived with paperwork for the sanctuary's educational programs. "He understands this place better than anyone. He and Thunderstrike have explored every inch." Inside the main barn, converted temporarily into headquarters, representatives from local businesses, schools, and churches gathered around a large table spread with blueprints and budget spreadsheets. The atmosphere was both somber and hopeful as Eliza outlined the challenges ahead. "The legal victory gave us the land and buildings, but not operating funds," she explained, pointing to columns of red figures. "We need substantial repairs before winter, and that's just to maintain what's here, not to develop the therapeutic programs." Robert Gray Wolfe studied the financial projections with a furrowed brow. The buildings are sound, but the fencing alone will cost thousands to make safe for traumatized horses. Martha Collins raised her hand. The school board approved our partnership proposal. We can provide student volunteers and integrate visits into our special education curriculum. A local contractor stood up. My crew can donate labor for basic repairs. Materials are the issue. As the meeting continued, Noah slipped out with Thunderstrike, returning to their exploration. The boy's steps were more confident now, his shoulders straighter. Occasionally, his lips moved in silent practice of words he was relearning to speak. Thunderstrike matched his pace perfectly, stopping when Noah stopped, moving when he moved. The following morning, before dawn painted the sky, Calvin White Eagle led a small ceremony at the heart of the property. A diverse group, church members, teachers, farmers, and Noah with Thunderstrike, gathered in a circle as the elderly Blackfoot man blessed the land with sage smoke and prayer. We are healing not just the animals, but the spirit of this place itself, he explained, his weathered hands moving through ancient gestures. Where there was exploitation, we bring respect. Where there was fear, we bring understanding. The first community fundraiser took place on a brilliant Saturday in April, filling Millerville's small town square with booths, food stands, and makeshift paddocks, where gentle therapy horses from neighboring farms gave children rides. Noah set up a small table where he offered charcoal sketches of horses for $5 each. By noon, the line stretched across the square, people waiting patiently for the quiet boy's remarkably evocative drawings. He's captured Thunderstrike's soul, whispered an elderly woman, examining her newly purchased sketch. Look at the eyes. You can feel the journey from fear to trust. The sanctuary's bank account grew modestly with each fundraising event, but the list of necessary repairs seemed to expand just as quickly. A particularly vicious snowstorm in early December tested both their progress and resolve when heavy winds damaged the main barn's roof, sending volunteers scrambling to protect hay stores and equipment. Thunderstrike sensed the danger before anyone else, growing agitated in his stall, pawing at the ground and nickering urgently. Noah, who had been helping in the feed room, immediately responded to the horse's warning, rushing to alert Eliza just minutes before the first section of roofing tore away. Emergency repair crew at the sanctuary. The call went out through the community phone tree, and within an hour, local farmers arrived with tools and materials, working through blinding snow to secure temporary covering over the damaged area. Never seen anything like it, marveled Mr. Hargrove, watching farmers he'd known his whole life braving treacherous conditions to save a place that hadn't existed 6 months earlier. Some of these folks barely have enough for themselves. Exhausted volunteers gathered in the relatively dry tack room as the storm raged outside. Someone produced thermoses of coffee and homemade sandwiches. Noah moved among them with Thunderstrike at his heels, the Mustang unusually comfortable in the crowded space, as if understanding these humans had come to protect his home. It was during this impromptu gathering, as Noah helped distribute coffee cups, that it happened. The boy reached for a thermos, turned to Miguel Hernandez and said in a voice raspy from disuse, "Water?" The single word, barely audible above the howling wind, caused the room to fall silent. Miguel, recovering quickly from his shock, handed Noah a water bottle with shaking hands. "Yes, water." "Good, Noah," he said gently, as if speaking to a much younger child. Eliza, witnessing the moment from across the room, pressed her fingers to her lips to stop their trembling. Thunderstrike, sensing the emotional shift, moved closer to Noah, his muzzle gently nudging the boy's shoulder in what appeared to be encouragement. The word, Noah's first in 6 years outside of therapy sessions, became a talisman of hope for the sanctuary. If a boy could find his voice after such trauma, what other healing might be possible in this place? Progress came in small, precious increments. Noah began using single words with those he trusted most. Yes, to Dr. Mitchell during therapy. Apple when feeding Thunderstrike. Cold when Eliza reminded him to wear his jacket. Each utterance was celebrated quietly, with respect for the courage it required. The most emotional moment came during a Tuesday evening dinner at the Hargrove home. 3 weeks after the roof incident, Mrs. Hargrove placed a bowl of mashed potatoes in front of Noah, who looked up at her tired face and said clearly, "Thank you." The simple phrase caused Mrs. Hargrove to drop into her chair, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Mr. Hargrove's fork clattered against his plate. The other children froze, then erupted in excited chatter that only subsided when Noah covered his ears, overwhelmed by their reaction. "It's okay," Mrs. Hargrove soothed, wiping her eyes. "We're just happy to hear your voice, honey. So happy." As winter's grip tightened on Kentucky, the sanctuary faced its first major test as a functioning facility. A call came from the Bureau of Land Management. A trailer containing 6 Mustangs rescued from an illegal operation in Nevada would arrive the following day. The horses had been scheduled for slaughter before federal agents intervened. Despite the sanctuary being only partially ready, Eliza couldn't refuse. "We'll make it work," she assured the BLM agent. "These animals deserve a chance." Volunteers worked through the night preparing stalls and securing paddocks. Noah stayed late into the evening, helping where he could while Thunderstrike watched attentively from a nearby enclosure. When the transport trailer arrived the following morning, the sight inside shocked even Eliza's experienced eyes. The Mustangs were skeletal, covered in untreated wounds, their eyes vacant with fear and resignation. 2 couldn't even stand without assistance. "My God," whispered Martha Collins, who had come to document the arrival for the sanctuary's records. "How can people do this?" The most severely injured was a dun-colored mare with infected wounds along her flanks. She trembled violently when approached, pressing herself against the trailer wall in terror. After hours of careful work, 5 of the Mustangs had been coaxed into prepared stalls with fresh bedding, water, and small portions of high-quality feed. But the dun mare remained in the trailer, refusing to move despite all gentle attempts to lead her out. "She's too traumatized," Eliza concluded wearily. "We may need to sedate her to get her safely inside." Noah, who had been observing quietly, approached Eliza and tugged at her sleeve. When she looked down, he pointed to Thunderstrike, then to the trailer, his meaning clear. "You think Thunderstrike could help?" Eliza frowned. "It's risky, Noah. He's never been around other traumatized horses." But Noah's expression was resolute. After a moment's consideration, Eliza nodded. "We'll try, but at the first sign of trouble, we separate them." To everyone's astonishment, when Thunderstrike was brought to the trailer's open door, his behavior transformed. The Mustang, who had once been wild with fear, now projected calm authority. He nickered softly to the terrified mare, his head lowered non-threateningly. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, the mare's trembling lessened. Thunderstrike took a single step forward, then waited. After what seemed an eternity, the mare took a shaky step toward him. "He's showing her it's safe," Eliza murmured in wonder. "He understands what she's feeling." Thunderstrike led the mare, step by painful step, into the sanctuary. Their progress was agonizingly slow, but no human intervention could have accomplished what the Black Mustang did with his silent communication of safety and understanding. Rebecca Taylor from National Geographic arrived the following week, having heard about the sanctuary through conservation circles. The award-winning photojournalist spent days documenting the daily rhythms of silent whispers, her camera capturing both the heartbreak of the newly rescued horses and the growing confidence of Thunderstrike in his role as what she termed the ambassador of healing. "This is the most powerful story I've ever covered," Rebecca confessed to Eliza as they watched Noah and Thunderstrike leading the dun mare on her first walk outside the barn. "The way that horse understands what other traumatized animals need, it's almost like he's translating between worlds." Her photo essay, published 3 months later, brought national attention to the sanctuary. Donations began arriving from across the country, along with applications from volunteers and inquiries about the therapeutic programs still under development. Spring arrived with a renewal that seemed perfectly timed to the sanctuary's official inauguration. Blue ribbons decorated the freshly painted white fences, and the renovated main barn gleamed in the April sunshine. The entire community gathered for the ceremony, along with media representatives, officials from animal welfare organizations, and families seeking healing for children with special needs. Liza, dressed in a simple blue suit rather than her usual work clothes, stood before the assembled crowd, Noah and the Hargroves beside her. Thunderstrike, wearing only a blue ribbon tied loosely around his neck, stood at Noah's side without restraint. "This place," Eliza announced, her voice carrying across the attentive crowd, "is born from the understanding that healing happens through connection, not control. Here, traumatized horses and wounded people will find time and space to rediscover their inner strength." As the ceremony concluded and guests mingled over refreshments, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. A truck and horse trailer came barreling down the long driveway, skidding to a stop near the barn. Miguel Hernandez jumped from the driver's seat, his expression frantic. "I need help. I have 4 foals that would be sent to slaughter if I didn't take them," he announced urgently, opening the trailer door to reveal 4 spindly-legged young horses huddled together in terror. Thornwood is still running his operation through middlemen, even while facing charges. Miguel's words hung in the air as sanctuary staff rushed toward the trailer. Through the slats, 4 pairs of terrified eyes peered out. Foals no more than a few months old, their bodies showing signs of neglect and hurried transport. "These came through Sanderson's auction house," Miguel explained breathlessly as Eliza examined the frightened animals. "Same paperwork pattern as before, falsified origin documents. I overheard Thornwood's former ranch manager arranging it by phone." Jack Peterson, who had arrived to cover the inauguration for the Herald, immediately pulled out his notebook. "This confirms what my sources have been saying. Thornwood's operation wasn't just about one horse, it's an entire network." The revelation that Richard Thornwood was continuing his illegal trafficking operation, even while awaiting trial, sent ripples of anger through the gathered community. For Noah, however, the priority was clear. He approached the trailer slowly, Thunderstrike following close behind. The foals pressed together at the far end, trembling. "They're severely dehydrated," Eliza said, her professional demeanor masking her fury, "and that little chestnut has an infected leg wound." That evening, after the foals had been settled into the sanctuary's medical stalls, Jack Peterson sat with Eliza and Robert Gray Wolf in the small office that had once been Thornwood's trophy room. "It's bigger than we thought," Jack explained, spreading maps across the desk. "My investigation has uncovered trafficking routes across 5 states. Thornwood's just one player in a network that's been operating for years." Robert nodded grimly. "The federal lands where these horses are being captured are sacred to many tribes. These aren't just animals being stolen. It's cultural heritage being erased." Jack's finger traced lines across the map. "The pattern is always the same. Mustangs are captured illegally from protected lands, moved through a series of private properties to obscure their origin, given falsified paperwork, and then sold at legitimate auctions. And the BLM is overwhelmed," Eliza added. "They don't have the resources to track every horse." That night, Noah experienced his most vivid nightmare yet. He woke screaming, a sound that brought the entire Hargrove household running to his room. Mrs. Hargrove found him tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, his eyes wide with terror but fully present in a way they hadn't been during previous episodes. "Fire," he gasped, the words scratchy but clear. "They're trapped." The following morning, Dr. Mitchell arrived for an emergency session. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor of the Hargroves' living room, drawing with frantic energy. Page after page filled with detailed images, the campsite, the fire's progression, the fallen beam that had trapped him, and most significantly, the Mustang with the star marking emerging from flames to guide rescuers. "These aren't just dreams," Dr. Mitchell explained to the Hargroves later. "They're recovered memories. His mind is finally processing what happened that night." "Why now?" asked Mrs. Hargrove, glancing worriedly toward the kitchen where Noah sat with a cup of hot chocolate, Thunderstrike visible through the window standing sentinel in the backyard. "The connection with Thunderstrike is allowing him to process the original trauma from the horse that saved him," Dr. Mitchell explained. It's as if having a safe relationship with one Mustang has created a bridge to memories of the other. At the sanctuary, experts from the University of Kentucky's Equine Behavior Program had arrived to observe Thunderstrike's interactions with the recently rescued horses. Dr. Alan Forrester, the program's director, watched in fascination as the black Mustang systematically approached each new arrival, always at the same angle, always with the same careful body language. "This horse demonstrates levels of empathy that challenge our theories," he admitted to Eliza after a day of observation. "The way he adapts his approach to each horse's specific fear response suggests not just instinct, but actual understanding of psychological states." "He was traumatized himself," Eliza pointed out. "Perhaps that creates a kind of recognition." "Perhaps," Dr. Forrester agreed, "but I've worked with thousands of formerly abused horses. None exhibit this level of what almost appears to be purposeful healing behavior." The following weekend, the sanctuary hosted a demonstration of farrier work to educate visitors about proper hoof care. Noah had been helping set up chairs near the demonstration area when the farrier, Jim Baker, fired up his portable forge to heat a horseshoe. The sudden flare of flame and the acrid smell of hot metal triggered an immediate reaction in Noah. He froze completely, his body rigid, eyes fixed on the fire, unable to move or respond to his name. Thunderstrike, grazing in a nearby paddock, raised his head sharply. Before anyone could react, the Mustang had cleared the low fence with a powerful leap. Sanctuary visitors gasped, some backing away in fear of what appeared to be a horse charging toward the crowd. But Thunderstrike had only one focus. He positioned himself directly between Noah and the forge, effectively blocking the boy's view of the flames. The Mustang stood sideways, creating a living wall between Noah and the trigger of his trauma. Slowly, awareness returned to Noah's eyes. His hand reached out, touching Thunderstrike's neck, and his breathing gradually normalized. "Did you see that?" whispered a visitor. It's like he knew exactly what was happening to the boy. Calvin White Eagle, who had been helping with the demonstration, nodded solemnly. "Among my people, we believe some animals carry the spirits of ancestors protecting their loved ones. This horse understands suffering in a way most humans cannot." That evening, Jack Peterson presented his completed investigation to FBI agents who had arrived in response to Miguel's discovery of the trafficked foals. The conference room at the Lexington field office was filled with maps, financial records, and photographs documenting the elaborate network of Mustang smuggling. "Thornwood's offshore accounts show payments to at least 3 BLM contractors," Jack explained, pointing to highlighted bank statements. "And these shell companies all trace back to the same group of investors." "This is excellent work, Mr. Peterson," acknowledged Agent Carla Ramos. "We've suspected this operation for years but couldn't connect all the dots." 2 days later, an official letter arrived at the sanctuary. The legal team representing Richard Thornwood was contesting the confiscation of his property, citing governmental overreach and procedural irregularities in the seizure. An emergency meeting was called in the main barn. Legal experts, community leaders, and sanctuary staff gathered around hay bales arranged as makeshift seating. The mood was somber as their pro bono attorney, Sarah Jenkins, outlined the situation. "Thornwood's lawyers are arguing that the judge's ruling exceeded his authority," she explained. "They're requesting a stay on the property transfer pending a new hearing." "But what about the illegal acquisition of Thunderstrike?" asked Martha Collins. "That was proven beyond doubt." "They're not contesting that part," Sarah clarified. "They're arguing that the remedy, confiscating the entire property, was disproportionate to the offense." Murmurs of concern rippled through the gathering. All the work, all the progress, all the healing that had begun, suddenly threatened by legal maneuvering. To everyone's surprise, Noah stood up in the middle of the meeting. His hands moved in fluid sign language that Eliza translated for the group. "This land belongs to the horses now." The simple declaration from the previously silent boy carried a moral weight that silenced the room. After a moment, Calvin White Eagle nodded in agreement. "The boy speaks truth. This place has found its purpose. The law must recognize what the heart already knows." The following morning, Noah asked to be taken to the site of the fire that had claimed his parents' lives. Eliza drove him to the campground in the Daniel Boone National Forest, now rebuilt with no visible traces of the tragedy that had occurred 6 years earlier. Thunderstrike traveled in a trailer behind them, Noah insisting that the horse needed to be present. When they arrived, Noah walked slowly to a clearing among tall pines. He stood silently, eyes closed, breathing deeply. Then he began to speak, not in signs, but in halting, determined words. "Here," he said, pointing to where the family tent had stood. "Mom and Dad. There." His finger traced the path of the fire. "Horse came. From there." He pointed to a trail leading from the forest. "Star on face. Like him." He touched Thunderstrike's muzzle gently. Thunderstrike remained unusually still, his ears moving constantly, as if listening to echoes only he could hear. The Mustang lowered his head to the exact spot Noah had indicated as the location of the collapsed tent, nostrils flaring as he scented the ground. "It's like he knows," Eliza whispered, watching the horse's methodical investigation of the site. "He does," Noah said simply. That evening, returning to the sanctuary after dark, Eliza found Noah asleep in the stables, his body curled against Thunderstrike's protective form. The Mustang stood guard, barely acknowledging her presence with a flick of his ears. Making a decision that would shape all their futures, she pulled out her phone and composed an email resigning from her last consulting positions. "We're not going to lose what we've built here," she murmured, stroking Thunderstrike's neck before quietly leaving. "This is too important to too many." Meanwhile, in a luxurious law office in Louisville, Richard Thornwood smiled maliciously at his attorney while signing new documents. "I found a legal loophole. The judge may have banned me from owning horses, but he said nothing about my son owning them," he revealed, outlining his plan to use his rarely mentioned adult son as the new owner to reclaim Thunderstrike, the horse that had become the symbol of his public humiliation. The gleam in Richard Thornwood's eyes as he signed the documents sent a chill down his attorney's spine. Edward Grayson had represented many wealthy clients with questionable ethics during his 20-year career, but something about Thornwood's vindictiveness felt different. This wasn't just business. It was personal. "Are you certain this is wise, Richard?" Grayson adjusted his tie nervously. "The public sentiment is overwhelmingly against you. Perhaps accepting the loss gracefully would be better for your remaining business interests." "Gracefully?" Thornwood scoffed, pushing the signed papers across the mahogany desk. "That horse and that mute brat humiliated me. Nobody does that to Richard Thornwood without consequences." 3 days later, a sleek black Prius pulled up to the entrance of Silent Whisper's sanctuary. The contrast with Richard Thornwood's usual flashy vehicles was striking, as was the young man who emerged from the driver's seat. James Thornwood, 32, bore his father's height and strong jawline but lacked the older man's bombastic presence. His clothing was casual but expensive, dark jeans and a blue button-down beneath a light jacket. His expression as he surveyed the sanctuary grounds held curiosity rather than the contempt most expected from anyone bearing the Thornwood name. Inside the main office, Eliza stared at the court order James had handed her, her heart sinking with each paragraph. The document granted James Thornwood the right to evaluate Thunderstrike as contested property, pending a new hearing on the disposition of his father's assets. "I don't understand," she said finally, looking up at the younger Thornwood. "Your father was found to have acquired Thunderstrike illegally. How is this even possible?" James maintained a professional distance. "The ruling on the horse itself isn't being contested. The property seizure is. Until that's resolved, the court has granted me limited access to assess the animal's condition and value as part of the estate inventory." Noah, who had been stacking feed bags when James arrived, now stood in the doorway, his thin frame rigid with protective defiance. Without a word, he moved to position himself between James and the path to Thunderstrike's paddock, arms crossed firmly across his chest. James noticed the boy and his stance, his expression softening slightly. "You must be Noah." His voice gentled. "I'm not here to take him away today. I just need to see him and document his condition." Noah remained unmoved, his blue eyes holding James's gaze with an intensity that made the man look away first. "Mr. Thornwood," Eliza said carefully, "Thunderstrike is extremely sensitive to strangers, especially men. Your presence could undo months of progress." "I understand your concern," James replied, surprising her with his reasonableness. "But I'm not my father. I'm not here to cause problems. I genuinely want to understand what's happening here." The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of an elegant town car. Senator Catherine Williams, a stalwart environmental advocate with 20 years in Kentucky politics, stepped out, her silver hair gleaming in the spring sunshine. "Dr. Washington," she called, striding toward them with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to see this sanctuary that everyone's talking about." Eliza quickly made introductions, noting the flicker of recognition in James's eyes when the senator's name was mentioned. "Thornwood," the senator repeated, studying James. "Any relation to Richard?" "His son," James admitted, discomfort evident in his posture. "I see." The senator's gaze sharpened. "I've opposed your father's development projects for years. His approach to environmental concerns has been problematic." "We don't always share the same values," James said carefully. The senator turned to Eliza. "This sanctuary represents exactly the kind of conservation I've been championing for decades. The therapeutic programs you're developing could become a model nationwide." As the senator toured the facilities, James observed the operations with evident curiosity. Noah reluctantly allowed him to approach Thunderstrike's paddock, though the boy maintained his protective stance nearby, watching every move. Thunderstrike's reaction to James was cautious but not panicked. The Mustang maintained his distance, observing the newcomer with the heightened awareness that characterized his approach to all unfamiliar humans. "He's magnificent," James said quietly. "I can see why my father wanted him." "He's not a trophy," Noah said suddenly, his voice startling both James and Eliza with its clarity. "He's a person." James turned to the boy, genuine surprise in his expression. "You speak." Noah met his gaze steadily. "When it matters." Later that afternoon, a group of ranch workers gathered in the small community center at the edge of Millerville. Most were Hispanic, their hands calloused from years of hard labor. Miguel Hernandez stood before them, explaining in both Spanish and English why their testimonies mattered. "Señor Thornwood nos pagaba menos del mínimo y amenazaba con llamar a inmigración," explained one older man, his eyes downcast. "Many of us had no papers, but we had families to feed." The attorney taking their statements nodded grimly. "Wage theft, threats of deportation, unsafe working conditions. This strengthens the case against Thornwood's character and business practices." As these testimonies were being collected, Jack Peterson sat in the CNN studio in Louisville, the bright lights emphasizing his earnest expression as he outlined the findings of his investigation. "Our investigation uncovered a systematic operation of illegal capture of protected Mustangs across 5 states," he explained to the attentive anchor. "This wasn't just one businessman's hobby. It's an organized network that's decimating wild horse populations in protected areas." The following day, Noah approached James cautiously as the younger Thornwood photographed Thunderstrike's paddock area. The boy didn't speak but began demonstrating how the Mustang responded to silent commands. A subtle hand gesture that caused Thunderstrike to approach, another that signaled him to stop, a third that invited him to lower his head. James watched with growing fascination. "I've never seen anything like this. No verbal commands at all?" Noah shook his head, then gestured toward his own throat, and then to Thunderstrike's scarred body, the meaning clear. Both had been hurt by loud, demanding voices. "I think I understand," James said softly. Later, James visited what the sanctuary staff called the memory room, a small space in the converted farmhouse filled with photographs and news clippings documenting the story of Noah and Thunderstrike. He moved slowly from one display to another, the report of the fire that killed Noah's parents, photos of the boy's star-shaped scar, articles about the Mustang with the star marking that had led rescuers to the trapped child. His fingers traced the outline of a photograph showing Thunderstrike's star marking alongside Noah's scarred palm. Something in his expression shifted, a hardness giving way to uncertainty. That evening, an unexpected spring storm swept through Kentucky, bringing violent winds and torrential rain. Noah, who had been helping with evening feeding when the storm hit, found himself working alongside James to secure loose equipment and protect the newest arrivals from the frightening sounds. In the medical barn, a young filly rescued from the transport Miguel had intercepted panicked at a particularly loud thunderclap. Before James could react, Noah was there, placing himself between the frightened animal and the perceived threat, his movements slow and deliberate. The boy made no sound but positioned his body to block the filly's view of the flashing lightning, creating a human shield of calm in the chaos. James grabbed tarps to cover a section of roof where rain had begun to leak through, working efficiently despite his expensive clothing becoming soaked and muddy. When he handed Noah a tool without being asked, exactly when the boy needed it, a moment of unspoken understanding passed between them. The storm continued into the night, and James, unable to leave safely, accepted Eliza's offer to stay in the sanctuary's small guest room. While drying off after a hot shower, he opened his laptop to check emails. A folder labeled Thornwood Enterprises caught his eye, files his father had shared with him months ago when attempting to involve him in the family business. Clicking through documents absent-mindedly, James froze when he saw photographs he'd never noticed before. Horses with fresh wounds from improper handling, emails discussing bribes to inspectors, and most disturbing, a spreadsheet calculating the acceptable loss rate for Mustangs during capture and transport. The following morning, under clear skies that betrayed no evidence of the previous night's storm, an official inspection team arrived from the Department of Agriculture. James accompanied them as Thunderstrike was evaluated, his court order giving him the right to be present during any official assessment. As the inspectors took measurements and photographs, Thunderstrike grew increasingly agitated. Noah moved closer, attempting to calm the Mustang with his presence. Suddenly, the horse raised his head sharply, nostrils flaring as he caught a scent that triggered an immediate reaction. Thunderstrike reared unexpectedly, spinning toward James with eyes wide in panic. Noah stepped between them instinctively, but in the Mustang's terror, he knocked the boy against the paddock fence. A sharp edge caught Noah's forehead, opening a gash that immediately began bleeding. "Document this incident," instructed the lead inspector grimly, making notes on his clipboard as Eliza rushed to attend to Noah's injury. Aggressive behavior noted. Potential risk to the minor. James stood frozen, watching blood trickle down Noah's pale face. The boy wasn't crying, wasn't even seeming to notice his injury. He was entirely focused on calming Thunderstrike, who had retreated to the far corner of the paddock, trembling visibly. "What triggered him?" James asked, his voice shaken. He was fine until just before he reared. Eliza, applying pressure to Noah's wound, looked up with sudden realization. "Your jacket. Is it your father's?" James glanced down at the expensive leather jacket he'd grabbed from his car that morning when the temperature had dropped. "Yes, I borrowed it a few weeks ago. Why?" Thunderstrike recognized his scent, Eliza explained. That's what triggered the panic response. The inspector continued writing. Regardless of the trigger, this incident raises serious safety concerns. Later, after Noah had been treated with butterfly bandages and the inspection team had departed, James paced in the sanctuary parking lot, his phone pressed to his ear. "You never said there were children involved," he hissed into the device, his free hand clenched in anger. "Or that the horse saved this boy's life." Richard Thornwood's voice crackled through the speaker, dismissive and cold. "Irrelevant sentimentality. That animal is worth a fortune with the right marketing. The boy is a complication we'll manage." "Manage?" James's voice rose. "He's a child who survived a tragedy, and you're trying to take away the one thing that's helping him heal." "Don't be dramatic," his father scoffed. "I raised you to be smarter than this. The horse is an asset, nothing more." James ended the call and stood motionless in the fading light. From a distance, he could see Noah sitting beside Thunderstrike's paddock, the bandage on his forehead stark white against his skin. The Mustang had recovered from his panic and now stood close to the fence, his muzzle gently touching the boy's shoulder in what appeared to be an apology. As medical personnel treated the cut on Noah's forehead, James Thornwood made a decision that would change all their lives. He copied all his father's incriminating files onto a USB drive, handed it silently to Jack Peterson, who had arrived to check on Noah, and whispered, "Use this to finish him once and for all. Just give me time to confront him personally before you publish." The USB drive weighed in Jack Peterson's palm like a tiny bomb, potential destruction contained in a device smaller than a matchbox. He watched James Thornwood's Prius disappear down the sanctuary's driveway, dust billowing behind it. Something had shifted in the younger Thornwood, a moral line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Jack slipped the drive into his pocket, already mentally composing the article that would bring down an empire built on animal suffering. Inside the main barn, the atmosphere was tense as Eliza finished reviewing the inspection report with the sanctuary's small staff. The official document highlighted the incident with Thunderstrike, categorizing it as aggressive behavior and recommending reassessment of the animal's suitability for a therapy setting. This couldn't have come at a worse time, Eliza sighed, placing the report on her makeshift desk, a repurposed feed storage bin. The hearing about the property is in 3 weeks. Noah sat in the corner, the bandage on his forehead a stark reminder of the morning's events. His fingers moved in sign language that Martha Collins interpreted for the others. It wasn't Thunderstrike's fault. He smelled Thornwood. Miguel Hernandez nodded emphatically. The boy is right. That horse remembers every person who hurt him. It's not aggression, it's self-protection. Outside, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, matching the mood within. The Lexington Grand Stakes was just a month away, the same event for which Richard Thornwood had originally intended Thunderstrike. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the prestigious race might coincide with their loss of the sanctuary. That evening, Noah worked with Dr. Mitchell, practicing simple phrases for the upcoming hearing where he hoped to speak about Thunderstrike. The psychologist had developed a method combining sign language with vocal exercises, using Thunderstrike's presence as emotional support during their sessions. "Remember, Noah," Dr. Mitchell encouraged, "breathe from your diaphragm. The words are inside you. They've always been there." Noah nodded, his hand resting on Thunderstrike's neck. The Mustang stood perfectly still, seeming to understand the importance of these exercises. When Noah struggled with a particular phrase, the horse would sometimes nudge him gently, as if offering reassurance. "Thunderstrike helps me find my voice," Noah practiced, each word carefully formed. The sentence was simple but powerful, exactly what they hoped would impact the judge. Miles away in Louisville, James Thornwood sat across from his father in the private dining room of an exclusive club. Crystal glasses and fine china gleamed under soft lighting, but the conversation was anything but refined. "You're being ridiculous," Richard Thornwood hissed, keeping his voice low enough not to attract attention from nearby diners. "This sudden conscience of yours is inconvenient and, frankly, suspicious." James maintained his composure. "I've seen what's happening at that sanctuary, Father. What they're building there matters. Those children connecting with the horses, it's healing them." "Don't be naive," his father scoffed. "It's a business opportunity they're exploiting. Slap some therapeutic labels on it, get tax exemptions, and tug at heartstrings for donations." "Is that really all you see?" James asked quietly. "Value only in dollars?" Richard leaned forward, his expression hardening. "I taught you better than this sentimentality. That property is worth millions for development. The horse is valuable breeding stock with the right marketing. Everything else is irrelevant." "Even the boy who nearly died when that horse panicked at your scent," James challenged. His father waved dismissively. "Accidents happen around large animals. That's why children shouldn't be near dangerous livestock." James stared at his father, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time. "You really don't care who gets hurt, do you? In business, caring is a liability. Richard replied, signaling for the check. "I thought I'd taught you that." Back at the sanctuary, preparations for the hearing intensified. Sarah Jenkins, their pro bono attorney, worked late into the night reviewing precedents for similar cases. The challenge was substantial, proving that the entire property, not just Thunderstrike, was essential for the therapeutic work being developed. "We need to demonstrate that the land itself is integral to the healing process," she explained to Eliza over coffee that had long gone cold. "That separating the horse from this specific environment would fundamentally undermine the therapy program." Unbeknownst to them, Richard Thornwood had already set a more sinister plan in motion. Late that night, a man named Curtis Reeves, recently hired as a part-time maintenance worker at the sanctuary, met with Thornwood in a deserted parking lot outside Lexington. "Make it look like an accident," Thornwood instructed, handing over a thick envelope. "Electrical issues are common in old barns. No one gets hurt, just enough damage to raise insurance questions and safety concerns before the hearing." Curtis nodded, pocketing the cash. "What about the animals?" "Not my concern," Thornwood replied coldly. "Just make sure it happens the night before the visit from the state inspector. Timing is everything." The following days brought unusually heavy rain to Kentucky, forcing most of the sanctuary's activities indoors. Noah spent hours in the main barn with Thunderstrike, the Mustang now comfortable enough to remain calm despite the thunderstorms that had once triggered his panic. The transformation in the horse was remarkable, from a wild, terrified creature to a steady presence that other traumatized animals seemed to gravitate toward. "He's becoming a leader," Calvin White Eagle observed, watching Thunderstrike guide a nervous new rescue away from a leaky section of roof. "He shows the others how to be brave." On the morning before the state inspector's scheduled visit, Noah arrived unusually early. Something had woken him, a sense of unease he couldn't articulate. Mrs. Hargrove had driven him to the sanctuary before heading to her early shift at the hospital, concerned by his obvious distress. The sanctuary was quiet in the pre-dawn light, most staff not due to arrive for hours. Noah walked directly to Thunderstrike's stall, finding the Mustang alert and restless, pawing at the ground and tossing his head. "What's wrong?" Noah whispered, placing his palm against the horse's neck. Thunderstrike's muscles quivered beneath his touch, the animal's instincts clearly sensing something amiss. Noah followed the Mustang's gaze toward the feed storage area. Moving cautiously, he made his way through the dimly lit barn. A faint odor hung in the air, not the usual scents of hay and horses, but something chemical and sharp. Near an electrical panel, he found Curtis Reeves carefully positioning what looked like an accelerant-soaked rag. Thunderstrike's warning whiny echoed through the barn just as Curtis turned to discover Noah watching him. The man's face contorted with surprise, then anger. "You shouldn't be here, kid," he growled, advancing toward Noah. "Nobody's supposed to be here yet." Noah backed away, his throat constricting with fear, words failing him once again. When his back hit a support beam, Curtis reached for him, only to freeze at the sound of hooves against wood. Somehow, Thunderstrike had unlatched his stall door, a trick he'd never demonstrated before. The Mustang didn't charge, didn't attack. He simply positioned himself between Noah and the threat, his powerful body creating an impenetrable barrier, his eyes fixed on Curtis with an intelligence that made the man step back. "That's enough, Curtis." James Thornwood's voice cut through the tension as he stepped into the barn, phone in hand. "I've recorded everything. The police are on their way." Curtis bolted for the door, but was met by Miguel Hernandez and 2 other ranch hands arriving for early feeding. They tackled him to the ground as James explained what was happening. "My father arranged this," he told Eliza when she arrived 30 minutes later, police cars filling the driveway. "I suspected he might try something like this after our dinner. I've been watching Curtis since I noticed him taking unusual interest in the electrical systems." The attempted arson transformed what had been a property dispute into a criminal investigation. Richard Thornwood was taken into custody that afternoon, his denial of involvement contradicted by bank records showing payments to Curtis and James's recorded conversation with the would-be arsonist. The following morning, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Noah sat with Thunderstrike under the old oak tree where they had first bonded during the storm. His small hand rested on the Mustang's scarred shoulder, fingers tracing the patterns of old wounds that told their own story of survival. "You knew," Noah said softly. "You always know when there's danger." That evening, as rain poured relentlessly, guests began arriving for an emergency community meeting in the main barn. Farmers in muddy boots sat alongside teachers, local business owners, and families whose children had benefited from the sanctuary's programs. Despite the weather and late notice, the barn was filled to capacity, people standing along the walls when seats ran out. Eliza provided updates on the legal situation, cautiously optimistic but realistic about the challenges ahead. Richard Thornwood's arrest changes things, but his legal team will work to separate the arson attempt from the property dispute. Noah, who had been sitting quietly beside Martha Collins, suddenly stood and walked to the center of the gathering. The crowd fell silent as the boy who had once been completely mute faced them. Thunderstrike, who had been watching from a nearby stall, nickered softly in what sounded remarkably like encouragement. "This place," Noah began, his voice quiet but steady, "saved me. Not just Thunderstrike, all of it, all of you." He paused, gathering strength. "When the fire happened before, I lost everything. My parents, my voice, my hope." The barn was absolutely silent except for the rain drumming on the roof. Thunderstrike lost everything too. His freedom, his family, his trust. Noah's hand moved to touch his scarred palm. "But here, we found something. Not what we lost, something new." Eliza wasn't the only one wiping away tears as Noah continued, each word clearly costing him effort, but delivered with growing confidence. It wasn't a polished speech, but its raw honesty affected everyone present more deeply than any eloquence could have. When Noah finished, Calvin White Eagle rose from his seat. "In our traditions, when the youngest speaks with such wisdom, the elders must listen. This boy has shown us that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds, but only when we create safe spaces for it to happen." The meeting evolved into action planning, legal strategies, media outreach, fundraising ideas. As the storm outside intensified, so did the community's resolve to protect what had been built. While bomberos finally controlled the fire and James was treated for second-degree burns, the fire investigator found clear evidence of sabotage, and security cameras recently installed captured the exact moment when the employee bribed by Richard Thornwood deliberately dropped a lit lantern into the hay, transforming what would have been the sanctuary's greatest obstacle into its ultimate legal salvation. The sudden release of the security camera footage changed everything. What had been planned as Richard Thornwood's greatest act of revenge became the sanctuary's most powerful weapon. The video, showing Curtis Reeves deliberately dropping a lit lantern into hay while checking his watch, spread across local news and social media within hours. The timestamp on the footage, just 2 days before the final hearing, made the calculated nature of the attack impossible to deny. Dawn broke over the partially burned barn with golden fingers of light illuminating the charred beams. James Thornwood, his right arm bandaged from wrist to elbow where he'd pushed through flames to rescue a trapped foal, stood beside Eliza surveying the damage. "It could have been so much worse," Eliza said quietly, watching volunteers already at work clearing debris. "If Noah and Thunderstrike hadn't raised the alarm." James nodded, wincing slightly as he shifted his injured arm. "My father has always believed money can solve any problem. Buy people, buy silence, buy his way out of consequences." He looked toward where Noah sat with Thunderstrike in the undamaged section of the paddock. But he couldn't buy that, what they have. The courthouse in Lexington buzzed with unusual energy on the morning of the hearing. News vans lined the street, reporters clutching microphones positioned strategically near the entrance. Inside, the largest courtroom was filled beyond capacity, with people standing against the walls. The front rows held a striking mixture of Silent Whispers volunteers wearing blue ribbons, children from Martha Collins's special education program, and representatives from indigenous tribes in their traditional clothing. Richard Thornwood, wearing an expensive suit that seemed at odds with his handcuffs, was escorted in by officers. His face, once commanding and confident, now carried the hollow look of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. His legal team surrounded him like a human shield, their expressions grim. Judge Eleanor Martinez, known for her no-nonsense approach, surveyed the packed courtroom with practiced neutrality. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to make clear that while the attempted arson is relevant to these proceedings, Mr. Thornwood is entitled to the presumption of innocence on those charges until proven guilty in criminal court. This hearing concerns solely the disposition of the property known formerly as Thornwood Estate and the Mustang called Thunderstrike." The first witness called was James Thornwood. A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom as he took the stand, his bandaged arm visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. "Mr. Thornwood," began Sarah Jenkins, the sanctuary's attorney, "could you please explain your relationship to the defendant and to the property in question?" James looked directly at his father as he spoke. "Richard Thornwood is my father. Until recently, I was relatively uninvolved in his business affairs. I maintained purposeful distance from his methods, which I found increasingly questionable." "And what changed that distance?" Sarah prompted. "I began investigating how Thunderstrike was acquired after being asked to represent my father's interests in recovering the horse." James's voice remained steady. "What I discovered was not just one illegal acquisition, but a pattern of wildlife trafficking, employee exploitation, and environmental violations spanning decades." For the next hour, James methodically outlined the evidence he had gathered, presenting documents that showed how Mustangs were captured from protected lands, their identification altered, and their origins obscured through a series of shell companies. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as emails between Richard Thornwood and various officials detailed bribes, threats, and cover-ups. "My father didn't just see Thunderstrike as a horse," James concluded. "He saw him as a symbol of his ability to take whatever he wanted, regardless of laws or ethics. When that symbol instead became associated with his public humiliation, his vindictiveness became dangerous." During a brief recess, Noah sat outside the courtroom, breathing deeply as Dr. Mitchell had taught him. The noise and confinement of the courtroom had begun to trigger his anxiety, bringing back flashes of being trapped during the fire. Eliza sat beside him, her steady presence an anchor. "You don't have to speak if it feels too much," she assured him. "The documentation is strong." Noah shook his head determinedly. "I need to, for Thunderstrike, for all of them." When court resumed, Noah was called to testify. He walked slowly to the witness stand, his thin frame somehow appearing stronger than it had months before. Judge Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Noah, I understand speaking is difficult for you. You may use sign language if you prefer, with Dr. Washington interpreting." Noah shook his head. "I want to use my voice," he said softly but clearly. "Thunderstrike helped me find it again." For the next 15 minutes, Noah described his journey with Thunderstrike, not just the facts, but the silent language they had developed, the way the horse recognized his trauma because of his own, how they had healed each other through patience and presence rather than force. "He knew what I needed before I did," Noah explained, his voice growing stronger with each sentence. "When I was trapped in silence, he showed me another way to speak. When he was trapped in fear, I showed him another way to be brave." When asked about the fire, Noah's eyes grew momentarily distant, but he continued. "Thunderstrike pushed me toward the door. He knew what was happening before anyone. He always knows when there's danger." Noah looked directly at Richard Thornwood. He remembers everyone who ever hurt him, but he also remembers kindness. That's what makes him special. The most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Dr. Alan Forrester from the University of Kentucky's Equine Behavior Program presented findings from his observations of Thunderstrike's interactions with other traumatized horses. "What we've documented at Silent Whispers challenges established theories about equine cognition," he explained, showing video clips of Thunderstrike systematically approaching frightened newcomers. "This Mustang exhibits what can only be described as intentional healing behavior. He positions himself between triggers and traumatized horses. He models calm responses. He uses his body to create safe spaces." Dr. Forrester turned to face the judge directly. In my 30 years studying equine behavior, I've never seen anything like it. Separating this horse from the sanctuary environment would not only be detrimental to him, but would deprive science of understanding this remarkable phenomenon. After 2 days of testimony, the court relocated to Silent Whispers for the final demonstration. Under a brilliant blue sky, the assembled officials, lawyers, and witnesses gathered in the main paddock. Noah stood alone in the center, waiting. At a signal from Judge Martinez, Thunderstrike was released from his stall without halter or lead rope. The Mustang paused at the paddock entrance, surveying the crowd of strangers with alert ears and cautious eyes. For a tense moment, some wondered if the horse would refuse to enter with so many people present. Then Noah extended his hand with the star-shaped scar. Thunderstrike's focus immediately narrowed to the boy. With deliberate steps, the Mustang crossed the paddock, ignoring everyone else as if they didn't exist. When he reached Noah, he lowered his head, bringing his star-marked muzzle to the boy's scarred palm. What happened next drew gasps from even the most stoic observers. Noah smoothly mounted Thunderstrike's bare back, using only a gentle grasp of mane. Without bridle, saddle, or any equipment, they began moving together. It wasn't just riding, it was a dance of perfect communication. The Mustang responded to invisible cues, changing direction, pace, and movement with fluid grace. Noah's body seemed to meld with the horse's, two beings moving as one across the paddock. After several minutes of this extraordinary demonstration, Thunderstrike came to a halt in front of Judge Martinez. With remarkable gentleness, the Mustang knelt, allowing Noah to dismount with grace before rising again to stand protectively beside the boy. The judge removed her glasses, not bothering to hide her emotion. "In 28 years on the bench," she said, her voice carrying across the silent gathering, "I have never witnessed a more compelling argument for the recognition that our relationship with animals must transcend notions of property and ownership." Her formal ruling, delivered the following day, was unequivocal. This court not only confirms the status of Silent Whispers Sanctuary and grants permanent residence to Thunderstrike, but extends protection to the entire property as a site of scientific, therapeutic, and cultural significance. 5 years passed, seasons flowing one into another across the Kentucky hills. The sanctuary expanded, new buildings rising alongside the carefully preserved old barns. Where Thornwood had once planned luxury developments, native grasses now swayed in the wind, providing natural habitat for birds and small wildlife alongside the rescued horses. Noah, now 17 and considerably taller, led a group of university students along a well-maintained path. His voice, though still quieter than most teenagers, carried confidently as he explained the sanctuary's programs. "Each horse has their own story," he told the attentive group, pausing beside a paddock where a chestnut mare grazed peacefully. "That's Ember. She was so traumatized when she arrived that she couldn't bear human touch. Thunderstrike was the first to reach her." The students, veterinary medicine majors from the University of Kentucky, scribbled notes and asked thoughtful questions. Their professor, Dr. Mitchell, who had once been Noah's trauma therapist, smiled with pride at how articulate her former patient had become. "Where is Thunderstrike now?" asked a young woman with braided hair. Noah grinned and pointed toward a distant hill where a black horse, now showing silver strands in his mane, stood beneath the same oak tree where he and Noah had once sheltered during a storm. "He's semi-retired, still helps with the new arrivals, but spends more time just being a horse now." That evening, as the day's visitors departed and the sanctuary settled into its nighttime routine, Noah walked up the hill to where Thunderstrike waited. The Mustang's once jet-black coat now carried the dignified silver markings of age, but his eyes remained bright and alert, his body still powerful despite the passing years. Noah sat beside him in the grass, watching the sunset paint the Kentucky hills in gold and crimson. In the distance, the newly completed education center gleamed white against the darkening landscape. Beyond it, dozens of rescued Mustangs grazed in the expansive fields, many bearing the same characteristic star marking that linked them to Thunderstrike's original herd. James Thornwood, who had transformed his law career to focus on environmental and animal protection, emerged from his small office at the edge of the property. After his father's conviction and imprisonment, James had dedicated himself to the sanctuary, using his legal expertise to expand its protections and establish similar reserves across the country. As twilight deepened, Noah mounted Thunderstrike one last time for their evening ride. They moved together along the ridgeline, silhouetted against the dying light, two souls who had found each other in darkness and forged something unbreakable. My silence wasn't emptiness. Noah's voice carried on the evening breeze as he spoke to a documentary filmmaker recording their story. It was a waiting space for the right language, and Thunderstrike taught me that sometimes the deepest connections don't need words, just hearts willing to listen to the whispers that exist in silence. The camera pulled back, revealing dozens of new Mustangs running freely through the sanctuary fields, and a sign at the entrance that now declared, "Every scar tells a story. Every story deserves to be heard."